Call the member for Tangi.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I'm very pleased to follow the member for Swan in supporting this bill. I rise to speak on this bill not only on the specifics in so much as the general. That is, the general thrust and meaning of this bill and what it hopes to address. The increased diversity in the Australian aviation industry requires continuous improvement in the aviation safety regulatory regime. While Australia has an enviable flight record in aviation safety built on a strong regulatory system, any regulator must keep pace with the industry that it represents and regulates. Australia's aviation safety governance structures and processes have continued to evolve since the initial establishment of CAA with the Civil Aviation Act in 1988, covering the operations of the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, Australia's aviation safety regulator. CAA was established in July 1995 under an updated Civil Aviation Act 1988 as the Independent Aviation Safety Regulator, a Commonwealth statutory authority with responsibility for the safety regulation of civil air operations in Australia and Australian aircraft operating outside Australian territory. At the very heart of this bill is safety. How does a governing body catch up with an industry that is moving so quickly? This bill adds 2 members to the CAA board, taking the total from 5 members to 7. This includes the Director of Aviation Safety as an ex officio member. The 2 additional members, importantly, will have operational and/or technical aviation experience. The provisions of the bill will provide for the CAA board to be comprised of 6 members appointed by the Minister, plus the Director of Aviation Safety as an ex officio member. In other words, 7 in total. An expanded board with experience and background in aviation would be better equipped to implement CAA's new strategic direction to be established by the government after considering the outcomes of the External Aviation Safety Regulation Review due to be completed in May. There are no other issues related to bringing CAA up to world's best standard. There are other issues. It is the hope of all government members that the proposed changes in this bill will achieve that standard. It is the hallmark of a good government, and especially of this government, that common sense be at the centre, the heart of legislation. So yes, the size of the board is to increase, but this is to address the backlog of issues building due to the changing nature of aviation and the increasing complexity surrounding that industry. There are too many new issues to detail. Suffice to say that the world is a very different place to what it was in 1995. The common sense aspect of this legislation is item 2 of the bill. In brief, item 2 states, item 2 increases the number of written requests that the chair must receive from board members before the chair is required to call an ad hoc board meeting. With the increased size of the board, this amendment keeps in place the requirement that the chair must call an ad hoc board meeting if he or she receives written requests from at least 50% of the remaining board members, including the director. So this cuts down on the number of 2-person board meetings, cuts down on expenses claims for meetings that have no value. It is more democratic and more efficient. Responsible government is responsive. And this legislation, while in process for considerable time, looks timely in light of revelations arising from an inquiry in the other place into CAA standards. During this inquiry into Qantas, an engineering union official accused CAA of failing to properly supervise maintenance and of favouring the national airline. A Senate committee was told that the engines of a Qantas jet weren't properly attached after it was serviced in Hong Kong, and CAA was accused of handling the incident inappropriately. There is no reason why CAA should not be a world leader, nor is there any reason why Australia should not set industry standard rather than follow industry leaders. To be specific, let me expand on the specific example of the use of electronics during takeoff and landing. In the United States, it is possible to use electronic devices at all stages during flight, including takeoff and landing. This is not the case in Australia, and while not a big issue in and of itself, it is indicative of a governing authority that is behind the curve. So this legislation is timely. CAA is a slow body, and governing processes even slower. It is my ardent hope that this necessary increase in bureaucracy results in the speeding up of the process. Hopefully more hands will make light work of the increased demands on CAA. At this juncture, I'd like to talk about how CAA impacts constituents in my electorate of Tangney. Tangney is an electorate that knows the benefit of both private and commercial flight, and also the downsides associated with both, which were alluded to by and spoken about by the member for Swan. Jandakot Airport is a key stakeholder, and like any airport or private operator, should have a role in the greater discussion regarding aviation regulations and CAA. However, it is not only significant financial stakeholders that are impacted by any change to CAA or the regulatory environment surrounding aviation. A demonstration of this point is that in October 2013, I was briefed by a constituent, Mr. John Jansen, about the impact of how seemingly small changes can have a significant impact. He wished to highlight what he had been alerted to by Mr. Max Scorer, namely that the strictest standards of safety should be religiously enforced on commercial airlines. It is sometimes not possible or practicable with recreational aircraft. He had recently retired from CAA at the end of June 2013 after just on 30 years of service to CAA and its predecessors as an airworthiness inspector. Previous to his employment in 1983 with the then Department of Aviation, he worked in the field of aircraft maintenance as a licensed engineer covering large airline aircraft, light aircraft and corporate jet aircraft. He also spent some time as a flight engineer, and in his younger years he served with the RAF City of Melbourne 21 Squadron. So to say that he is a person of great experience would be no exaggeration. And he approached me with a view to offering his services to the aviation industry to give something back to an industry that has provided him with a living for many years. In January 2014, he clocked up 50 years of service in aviation. Mr. Scorer gave me a presentation in regard to the recently implemented Civil Aviation Safety Regulation 1988 Part 42. It is my belief that more of the aviation community should be aware of the situation as now exists under Part 42. One would obviously realise that the intricacies of government legislation can be complex, so I will try to explain the requirements as briefly as possible in an attempt to give you some idea of why safety legislation could mean to the GA sector. Under Civil Aviation Regulation CARS 1988-30, the regulation under which GA maintenance organisations presently gain approval, the norm has been that the operator's chosen maintenance organisation to control all the pending maintenance requirements for their aircraft. In other words, the maintenance organisation would keep concise records of what is required to safely maintain the aircraft and comply with all CASA legislation. Much of this is provided to the customer as part of the maintenance services and as a normal function of aircraft maintenance. It is called continuing airworthiness control or continuing airworthiness management. CAMOs are granted under Part 42G. The RPT sector, which used to operate under CAR 30, now operate under Part 145, the actual physical maintenance function, and Part 42G, airworthiness management, two different approvals. Part 42B, specifically 42042, says that the registered operator of an aircraft operating under an air operator's certificate must have a contract with a CAMO or form their own CAMO. The requirements relating to gaining approval as a CAMO are very costly and difficult for the GA sector to achieve. For instance, a small maintenance organisation consisting of a chief engineer, quite often the owner, hangar foreman and licensed aircraft maintenance engineers, unlicensed personnel and quite often a couple of apprentices will not be allowed to utilise any of those personnel to form a CAMO. It will not be acceptable for them to carry out the two roles as they have done in the past. The CAMO must have a management structure consisting of an accountable manager, a responsible manager, quality manager, continuing airworthiness manager, airworthiness review manager, and so on. All of these personnel have to have formal qualifications to be acceptable to CASA to fill these positions. For instance, to fill the position of continuing airworthiness manager, you would have to be a LAME or equivalent. There are not enough LAMEs in Australia to carry out aircraft maintenance as it is. Pulling them out of the system and putting them in a CAM role would severely hamper the industry, both in terms of available personnel and imposing a huge increase in cost to the operator. At this time, CASA has not approved any independent CAMOs. All approvals have been to the RPT sector. There are thousands of aircraft in Australia that are affected. There are many private aircraft owners who make their own aircraft available to operators under leasing arrangements. This helps in two ways. It lessens the cost of ownership where maintenance costs are concerned, and it makes the aircraft available to operators who would otherwise not be able to finance the purchase of the aircraft. If any such aircraft are operating under an AOC, then the owner will have to contract the services of CAMO to gain an ARC. No ARC, no flying. The maintenance organisations will not be able to issue a certificate to release the service following the maintenance unless the aircraft has an ARC. These requirements will have far-reaching implications where the GA sector is concerned. The Flying Doctor Service, for instance, will have to comply with CAMO and ARC requirements. At the moment, the operation of the SO helicopters in Victoria, ferrying workers out to oil rigs, is a private operation. This operation, by the way, rivals the airlines in terms of departure and arrival frequencies. Via the new operational regs, this operation will be under an AOC. The Royal Flying Doctor Service is funded largely by donations. The requirement to either contract a CAMO or gain their own 42G approval will entail the use of some of those vital funds. The adoption of the EASA European legislation, which is what the new legislation is based on, is all very fine for airline-type operators such as Qantas or Virgin. However, expecting an organisation operating a couple of piston-powered Robinson R-44 helicopters carrying 3 passengers to a remote site to view cave paintings and expecting them to provide the same infrastructure as Qantas does for their Boeing 747s is a bit ludicrous. As Mr. Scorer pointed out, that needs to be back at the heart of lawmaking. I believe this bill is a fine example of sense. Items 2 and 3 of the bill exemplify this common sense approach. That is, with item 3 increasing the quorum limits, there is an added incentive to get more board members to attend, thus ensuring better delivery and decision-making. The Civil Aviation Amendment CASA Board Bill demonstrates this government's ongoing commitment to aviation safety. The coalition government are taking decisive action now to strengthen the nation's safety regulator and its oversight of the aviation industry. In the final analysis, it demonstrates the government's clear commitment to deliver hope, reward and opportunity to all Australians.